So let's go to the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and we're in sticky territory here. We're going to do this discussion, and in 48 hours, everything could be changing. Although I actually don't feel that way. I don't know about you. If
You
you,
know,
if,
a little bit earlier, there was a fighter jet that went over Beirut, and at first I thought it was the Israelis. Now I realize that it was the Russians
yeah,
practicing
well, they're pretty far
for.
out of airspace, aren't they?
Well,
Yeah, they had to practice somewhere.
that's because 20 minutes ago, after we started this, they took over Kiev already, and now
Yeah,
they're marching toward
they're
Beirut now.
expanding. They're expanding.
They're going all the way
They
to
were
they're going all the way, they're going east as well, south. They're going to take over the Mediterranean.
soon. They're going to be in America's front and backyards.
Well, I heard that there have been many false flags that have taken place, and by the time everyone sees this show, there have been probably like more than 100 different false flag operations will likely have taken place. And in fact, I've actually got some footage of some of these false flags that I thought we could play on our show. So here's the first one for you. Amazing
Russians really put in
there, just
money
like
for production.
I think that was Zelensky. That was Zelensky under the. I didn't see his face well, but
he's no longer our puppet anymore, is he? No.
Oh my god. Oh my god, that's so fun. For those who are only listening and not watching, Kevin just played a very high quality production. I think it was like
It's what Ned Price was warning us about.
Yeah.
That was coming.
Yeah.
In fact, I actually have one more clip. Really strange. They still like dress in like Soviet garb,
Yeah.
which is like
They put
so
a
much
lot
to
of
tell
effort.
him.
It looked so real.
by the way, did you see that British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss? She dressed like that when she went to Moscow,
Oh god.
and people in Moscow made fun of her. And then
Embarrassing.
she met with Sergei Lavrov and confused Russian territory for Ukraine and said, "Yes." Well, that was when she was in Ukraine, right?
Yeah. I love this photo. This is my favorite. I've been sharing this with the story I ran over at the Dissenter about the way this is disinformation from last month that we're talking about here. But then when they laundered the idea that there was going to be a Russian coup plot in Ukraine, and this is her.
I want to dress like that.
Yeah, like that helmet's like can fit two of her heads in there. It looks like almost.
It looks a little big. Like I feel like your helmet has to be a little bit more fitted for it to actually protect you.
Well, she apparently really likes to dress up, because this is when she was in Ukraine. But then when she went to Moscow, she also dressed up again. And then when Liz Truss, who, by the way, has no foreign policy experience, but all you have to do is just be a Conservative Party member and you can get that. It's a cynic here. So she was sent to Moscow and sat down with Sergei Lavrov, who's like one of the most experienced diplomats on earth.
Yeah, he's good.
This total noob just talking with Sergei Lavrov. And then she's like, "We demand that you remove your troops, you withdraw your troops." And then he was like, "Wait, our troops are in Russian territory. How are we supposed to withdraw them?" And then he said, "Do you not recognize our sovereignty over these two southern regions?" And he named them. And she said, "No, Britain will never recognize sovereignty over those regions."
So embarrassing.
And then her own ambassador was like, "Liz, those are that's Russian territory." Like, these are the morons we're talking about. So I said in a video I did that normally I don't agree with this analysis that like Western governments commit all these horrible atrocities and crimes because they're dumb. Like a lot of it is like the war in Iraq wasn't because George Bush was dumb. I mean, he was dumb, but it was a crime. Like it was an intentional crime orchestrated by criminals. And it wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just like a dumb decision. But in some cases, in the case of the British, like they are actually just idiots.
They're so dumb. These people are so stupid.
So let's see. I have some tweets I pulled out here that we can put on the screen. This is our from our favorite Julia Yaffe. Now that Wednesday is over and Moscow can accuse the US of making up a fake invasion day, it can start cranking up the temperature in the Donbass on Thursday, creating a situation so precarious that any wrong move could set off the war Washington's been warning of. I mean,
I love this tweet. I love this tweet because there's two just total U.S. government propagandists. Christopher Miller used to work for U.S. regime media, Radio Free Liberty, Radio Europe, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which was created by the CIA. It used to be called Radio Liberation from Bolshevism. So, Radio Liberation from Bolshevism veteran Christopher Miller, I think he's at BuzzFeed now, total propagandist against Russia. And Julia Ioffe, friend of Nazis and friend of what's his name, Richard Spencer. Her job now is she's at this place that's called Puck News, which every time I hear that, I'm like, are you sure that there's not like a letter off on there? Like, I think maybe the P should be.
They were trying to be cute, obviously,
but
in a very dumb way.
Basically, her job is just a water carrier, a water girl for the CIA. Like, all of her articles are just like, this is what anonymous CIA officials say about Russia this week.
That's pretty much. I think that's like all mainstream media at this point.
But especially her.
And then here's Melinda Haring, which this one is one I wanted to make sure I brought into our show because I know everyone was talking about the multi-point plan she claimed to predict that was what Putin's war plans would be for the last weekend. But this one was great because I love how after she was embarrassed, she was like, oh, no, sorry. That was part of Putin's plan to talk about troops and tanks. We really should be talking about how he's strangling Ukraine's economy and sapping the resolve of his people. Except actually, that's what the US and NATO are doing right now, is strangling Ukraine's economy and sapping the resolve of their people.
That's exactly right. I mean, the irony is that even Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, he was elected in a landslide as a peace candidate. I mean, he won in a huge victory, saying that he wanted peace with Russia against the Poroshenko oligarch, billionaire oligarch, chocolate man. He's known as Willy Wonka because the Willy Wonka of Ukraine because he has billions of dollars from chocolate. And he was seen as like, he was the Maidan candidate. So after the U.S. orchestrated a coup in 2014 in Ukraine in which Nazis were like the violent muscle of the coup, and Victoria Nuland, the third in command of the Biden State Department, she literally handpicked the top officials for the Ukrainian government after the coup. Poroshenko was their guy. Poroshenko was so corrupt. He brought in all this IMF debt, imposed austerity measures. He was so unpopular that the Ukrainian people voted in Zelensky as a peace candidate. He said he spoke Russian on his campaign trail, which, I mean, in a country where we're supposed to believe that Ukrainians just hate Russians. It's just like a blood feud or something. But he spoke Russian on his campaign, and he won in a massive landslide victory as a peace candidate. And then he did a 180. Zelensky came in. He started imprisoning pro-Russian politicians. He started imprisoning pro-Russian media outlets. Imprisoning pro-Russian politicians and shutting down pro-Russian media outlets. And he became a Western poster boy. And even now, the U.S., after he did all of those things on behalf of the U.S. is criticizing him because he's seen as too soft, and he's saying that Russia's not going to invade. We don't want war. And the main reason he's doing that is because the Ukrainian economy is just tanking. The currency that has been devalued and devalued and devalued. Capital is fleeing. Businesses are shutting down. Ukrainians who have money are taking their money out of the country and putting it in foreign bank accounts. They're leaving the country. Like, his country is actually being sapped, not only of energy, they're being sapped of capital. They're being sapped of people. They're being sapped of resources because every 3 days, the U.S. is telling people that Russia's going to invade. So obviously, if you're a foreign investor, you're not going to leave your money in a country you think is going to be invaded by Russia.
Mm-hmm. It's so crazy. It's so crazy. The U.S. is just like, taking a sledgehammer to its own allies. And for what?
And might drive Ukraine back into Russia. Like, who knows? I mean, I don't know. We don't know what discussions are being had privately.
It was funny. The Russian foreign minister said something really funny. She was like, since the West knows our invasion plans so accurately by like the day, can you just let me know what the plan is for the year so I can plan my vacation accordingly? Something along those lines. I thought that was
the Russian
funny.
Government is so good at like actual clapbacks. You know, like liberals love Jen Psaki, and they're like, "Oh my God, Jen Psaki had the best passive-aggressive clapback." Like, did you see her? Did you see her passive-aggressive stare? She was like. Meanwhile,
the
Russian diplomats' clapbacks are actually hilarious.
They are. They are.
So we got this one from another, and he's at the Atlantic Council. I don't know his exact position, but saying by all accounts, Ukrainian forces did not respond to Russian false flag operations and provocations that were designed to serve as a pretext for conflict. That takes incredible discipline. I'm afraid it won't be enough in the long run, but it has been impressive to witness. So I love this thing, like when people are restrained, when they do try to pull back from the brink, everyone has to be like, it's not going to last for long. We're going to get it back to where war is going to start. It's just.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about this in an interview that I did with Rania and Eugene over at Breakthrough, another great show. I always love to be on that show too. And the point that we were talking about is how the U.S. has this policy of have your cake and eat it too, right? So we saw this actually so clearly yesterday. That's February 17th in the UN Security Council. I don't know if you all saw this surreal speech by Anthony Blinken, in which it was just like I was like trying to scrub my like take the fog off of my glasses. I was like, what the hell is this? Is like it's like I'm back in 2003, and it's like I'm watching his predecessor, Secretary of State Colin Powell, talk about WMDs and all of this. And in this insane speech at the UN Security Council, he spends like 10 minutes talking about all these exotic false flag conspiracies that Russia might do. And he's saying that like, and I joked that I was interviewed about this, and I joked and I was like, man, after watching that speech, I think the only thing that Anthony Blinken was missing is it was a crystal ball. I was waiting for him to like talk about his like his astrological reading and like read my palm, because he acted as though the U.S. could tell the future. They were just like, Russia's going to do this. Russia's going to do this. He even said that Russia is going to potentially do a false chemical attack. And I was like, what? You mean like what you all did in Syria, but we can't say that because we're crazy conspiracy theorists if we say it. But it's now you're accusing Russia of doing it. And then finally, he had this line in his after for like 10 minutes being like, Russia's going to do this. They're going to do this. They're going to do this, as he could tell the future. And then he's finally, toward the end of his speech at the UN Security Council, he said, and we must say, if Russia doesn't invade, it shows that diplomacy worked. And it's just like, okay, dude. So what you're saying is you have all this supposed intelligence that Russia's going to invade in 3 days, in 10 days, in 70 days. But then if it does it, you have your bases covered because you can say, well, fortunately, we helped prevent this horrible Russian invasion. We have our cake and eat it too. So we manufacture the crisis. And then when the crisis that we manufacture doesn't happen, thank us for averting it.
No matter what they win, it's like the way they, yeah.
And they said, I'm just trying to pull up some information for this clip that I want to play here. But he said very clearly, all Putin has to do is come out and tell everyone that they're not going to invade Ukraine and everything will be better. And you have to laugh like very loudly because you know that that's not how it has worked. If he says, if Vladimir came out and looked right into the camera and said, and it would be in Russian, it wouldn't be in English, but if he came out and he said that they are not going to invade Ukraine very plainly, and then just walked away, let's pretend like he doesn't even add anything to it at all. They would sit there and they'd say, well, that's just a part of the master plan to hide the invasion that's coming soon.
Double reverse psychology, 5-dimensional chess.
Like, does anybody believe that shit? That like you can just walk up there and tell, or they've actually been to, and here's the other thing. Maybe you want to say something.
Well, but Kevin, also the Russian government has repeatedly said they are not going to invade. They've repeatedly said it. I mean, they keep saying like the Russian government has repeatedly said it, and what they say is that we don't have any plans to invade. The only circumstance in which we would intervene is if there is another attack on the Donbass that crosses our red line, which is what the whole thing is about here. It's not about a Russian invasion. It's about forcing Russia. The U.S. wants Russia to invade. That's what all of this is about. The U.S. wants Russia to intervene in eastern Ukraine so they can impose brutal sanctions and potentially cut off the Russian economy from SWIFT, which would be like the end of Russian commerce with Europe. Europe has come out openly. The German and French governments have come out openly and said they do not want to disconnect the Russian economy from the SWIFT system because Germany wants to import very cheap Russian gas through the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which, by the way, is already built, and all it's waiting is German certification. And this is a last-ditch effort by the hardcore anti-Russia hawks in the U.S. government, specifically Antony Blinken, Victoria Nuland. These are people who orchestrated the 2014 coup in Ukraine in the Obama State Department. And this is their last-ditch effort to sabotage the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to prevent Germany and France from forming close economic relations with Russia and, by extension, China. Macron just had a phone call with President Xi of China, in which he called for increasing French and Chinese relations, especially in terms of the economy. Like a lot of these countries in Europe, they don't necessarily have such insanely anti-Chinese views, and some of them actually don't want negative relations with Russia. If you look at polls in Germany, a lot of Germans want better relations with Russia, and the reality is that this is a last-ditch effort by the U.S. to force this NATO bloc discipline over Europe to prevent Europe from increasing its economic and political relations with Russia and China, because the U.S. can't wage a Cold War against Russia and China if its key allies are major economic partners of Russia and China who rely on Russian energy exports and rely on Chinese trade. That's all of what this is about. All of it.
And it's funny, Kevin, Ben, last night. Oh my God, I'm so foggy from this COVID that I brought on myself because I got vaccinated. Ben, yesterday after we had you on the Freedom Side, which we've also had Kevin on several times, we had on a German member of parliament.
She's great.
Yeah, she is really great for the Die Linke party. And
she represents a faction of the anti-imperialists within Die Linke in Germany. It's really good to see them.
And I was actually like so impressed with what she said, just because I was like, damn, she's going in hard. And she said something that really stuck with me. She said, America wants slaves, not allies. And it's true. It's true. Like, she's just like, they're dictating to us, like, who we can take energy from. And then she called for the Americans to leave Germany, like their troops, because, people forget that one of the biggest occupations, I guess you could call it kind of an occupation, of American troops in the world is in Germany. Yeah. I don't know the specific number, but it's like a crazy number of American soldiers.
Tens of thousands.
They have a huge base in Germany. They have nuclear weapons.
There are numerous. There are dozens of U.S. bases in Germany.
Yeah, and they have nuclear weapons in Germany. Like, Americans have the ability to fire nukes in Germany, and that's all because, pointing at Russia. But the point, she brought that up and she was like, she went on this whole tangent about how much danger the US has put Germany in and the rest of Europe in. And she's so right. I mean, when you look at Europe, she was like, we share a continent with Russia. We have to deal with like the outcome of any war that happens here. Like, you guys have the Atlantic Ocean. And when you think about American policy, especially in the last 25 years or so, the US has done so much to harm European security. And it really just shows you the fact that the Europeans never push back, almost never push back. It shows you that they are basically just clients of the Americans at the end of the day, because every war the U.S. has launched in the Middle East, who's reaped the consequences of that has more than any other, aside from the Middle East itself, has actually been Europe, because all of that refugee flow ends up going to Europe and actually destabilizing their politics. All of the right-wing movements that exist today in Europe have been fed and fueled by the surge of refugees that were fleeing America's wars. It's Europe had, the U.S. would freak out if there was like a little attack by some ISIS loser in America. Do you know how often that shit happened in Europe? Like, do you guys remember those couple of years where like every month there was something was blown up in some European city or some mass shooting in a European city by some ISIS psycho? So anyways, it's interesting. Like, all of what you're saying, plus this, it's like, man, the U.S. is like destabilizing its own allies.
Well, but that's what it has to do to wage a Cold War, because you can't wage a new Cold War, as in the first Cold War, without blocs. And the reality is that, I mean, Europe is really colonized by the US in a lot of ways. But to the extent that you see Germany and France as these outliers, unlike America's poodle Britain, I mean, Britain is just like a joke at this point. Boris Johnson is just being like, yes, sir, just like saluting the US flag. I mean, he just does whatever the US wants. But Germany and France in this conflict over Ukraine have formed a new bloc within the European Union. And Italy also is leaning toward Germany and France, whereas we have like the Anglo-American powers and the Eastern European NATO puppet regimes that all hate Russia, like the Baltic states, Poland, and Ukraine. But like even, you know, Italy, Germany, France, a few others, they want better trade with Russia and also with China, by the way. And the reality is that they don't want a new Cold War. Now, they will criticize the Russian government a lot. They'll criticize the Chinese government a lot. I'm not saying that they're like allies at all, but they have independent interests. They don't have the same interests as the US. And all you have to do is look at a map. If strictly from the perspective of a banker, and the head of the Italian government, the prime minister, Draghi, is a banker. He's a neoliberal EU banker. He's like the stereotype of the EU technocrats. But even he is like, look, it makes more sense for us to have trade with Russia. Like, why can't we do trade with this country that's so close to us? And China, by the way. He wants more trade with China. So the reality is that the U.S. is telling Europe not only to sabotage its own its own national security interests, its security interests, but also its economic interests. And this is a point that in the interviews that I've done with Michael Hudson, who's a brilliant economist, he has this brilliant book called Super Imperialism, talking about the economics of U.S. imperialism. He talks about how the main U.S. economic adversaries for decades have been the European powers. And it's about keeping the European powers down and subordinated economically to the US. And that's the whole point of NATO. NATO was created right after World War II in 1949. And by the way, it was created right after the creation of the Organization of American States in Latin America. And they both serve the same purpose. The OAS was created in 1948 in Latin America to keep as an alliance of right-wing anti-communist regimes to stave off socialism. And NATO was created as an alliance of capitalist regimes to stave off communism. And if you listen to the original strategists of NATO, they said clearly, the point of NATO is to keep the Soviet Union out and to keep Germany down and America on top. That's the famous slogan. And it's been changed since then. But you can hear people in Washington, like in these circles, like defense policy websites and the RAND corporations, they'll be like, the point of NATO remains to keep Russia out, Germany down, and America on top. Because if you think about it, if Germany wasn't occupied by the US, if Germany wasn't part of NATO, Germany would probably instantly be like, yeah, we're just going to have like half of our trade with Russia, because why are we going to do a huge part of our trade and import goods from the US, which is on the other side of the planet, when you have this massive country, Russia, and China, by the way? Like, the German government is not so uniformly anti-China as it is in the US. They would be like, yeah, we're just going to go over here and look eastward, because there's there's China, Russia, Korea, Japan. Like, there's these massive economies. Why does everything have to be this cross-Atlantic alliance? It's because NATO is forcing them to subordinate their security and their economic interests to the US. That's why NATO still exists. And you see these people in Washington being like, we don't get why NATO still exists. That's why it exists. It's all about keeping Europe down and dependent on the US. And that's all of what this is about with Ukraine, because if they can force NATO discipline over Europe behind Ukraine, they can prevent Europe from Europe's never going to abandon the US, but from integrating further with China and Russia. And that's why, if you listen to the press conference that the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz gave with Biden, in this press conference, the US press corps, as we all know, they're just like CIA stenographers. They just kept asking Olaf Scholz like 4 times. They were like, what about Nord Stream 2? What about Nord Stream 2? What about Nord Stream 2? And he refused to answer the question because he understood what's going on. As soon as Olaf Scholz, the new German chancellor, as soon as he says that if Russia invades, we're going to cancel Nord Stream 2, then Ukraine is going to launch a false flag at US orders to cancel Nord Stream 2. And Germany's not dumb. He knows, I mean, ironically, it's a lot of the German capitalists who want Nord Stream 2 because they have their own interests. They're not the same interests as Wall Street. So, like, ironically, it's like an example of German capitalism being subordinated to US capitalism as like the supranational imperialist capitalism. And he knew that as soon as he told US journalists that Germany will cancel Nord Stream 2 under a if there's a Russian invasion, the US will force that Russian invasion to cancel Nord Stream 2. That's what all of this is about.
Well, I know
on that note, well, I'm also fading.
Well, if you want to run off, that's okay. I wanted to play one clip to end, if that's okay. I've been sort of waiting here, trying to figure out a good place for this. But when I'm listening to you, Ben, I think about the moments during Donald Trump's presidency when he was thinking, there's always a good time for a trade war, and he was imposing tariffs on China, and he was quite proud of what he was doing and thought he could win, but I don't think we actually won. And now we're in an information war, which the US seems to think they can win. And I think that they're over exaggerating the extent to which there is information warfare coming from Russia, and then they're matching it with what they think is information warfare. And so there was this clip that went around from the Atlantic Council. Ben Judah was, I guess, hosting a panel discussion. And I understand this correctly, there's a former MI6 chief who's basically giving up the game for how everything's been working for the past few weeks. So let's end with this clip.
I think what the US administration in particular has been quite adept at in this crisis has been, first of all, corralling the West and coordinating and orchestrating a common Western response. And secondly, not allowing Putin to have it all his own way on the airwaves. Now, you talk about intelligence. I think actually these are not sort of gems from deeply sensitive agent reporting. This is what has been released. The idea that Putin might want to dislodge Zelensky and replace him with a puppet government, or that he's going to contrive a pretext for a Russian intervention in the east of Ukraine. These are based on a growing understanding and analysis of Putin rather than deep secret intelligence reports. And I think wrapping them up as intelligence and adding a few sort of juicy names to the reporting just gives some good stories from the media and helps push back against the narrative. It's a skillful use of information and analysis to turn the tables on Putin and his own ability to dominate the airwaves.
Yeah.
I mean, and Julia Ioffe, she tweeted, she wrote this article at Puck News, where, again, such a stupid name, where she admitted that the Biden administration's strategy is information warfare, disinformation. After Trump was elected, we heard all this stuff about Russian disinformation. This is actual disinformation by the US government, by the CIA, and it's disinformation warfare. I mean, people call it information warfare. The better term is disinformation warfare. It's creating fake news and putting everyone on edge so they're paranoid and they're not thinking straight, and they think that perpetually 3 days from now, Russia's going to invade.
Well, it's just incredible to me that it's okay now because it comes from U.S. intelligence agencies to I mean, it's always been okay, but they never really put it this way. But now they're outright saying it's from U.S. intelligence. This is what they're collecting. They're going to tell us what it is, and they're just going to publish it even if they don't know if it's going to happen, because then they can prevent Putin from doing the thing that they just revealed, which like, I've been following this for over a decade. We've been all following this for almost around the same time frame. I've never seen anything like this before. This is a new way of working with the press, but it seems like it's a new way of working with the press that's brought on by the fact that none of them are going to push back on this. None of them have any problem with being used in this manner by the U.S. security state.
Yeah, I mean, it really shows that obviously it's not new, but back in 2002, 2003, in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq, there were journalists who just made themselves loyal sonographers for the intelligence agencies. And that was a real problem, but I don't know how rampant it was. But at this point, it's basically every single reporter at a mainstream outlet who focuses on so-called national security, all of them.
Everyone
all they
is
do
Judith
is
Miller.
Yeah.
Like everyone is Judith Miller.
Yeah. And the last note we can end on here, because I have to go too, and I know that Rania is not feeling great from the China virus. But there was an interesting story which I'm kind of conflicted about, but I think that there is a possibility it could be true. That was published in Newsweek, and it was written by this guy Naveed Jamali, who's a former FBI special agent, or double agent rather. He's an FBI agent who also tried to infiltrate Russian intelligence, and I don't even think he did so very successfully. He claims he did, but I think he's probably exaggerating. But anyway, so this guy's a spook. He's an FBI guy, and he wrote this article at Newsweek a week ago, and it's called "U.S. Officials Say Russia Could Invade Ukraine in Day." Oh, sorry, that's another article he wrote. This is another one. Sorry,
another terrible article.
Yeah, I mean, dumb. No, this is his article. Here we go. Could U.S. intel of Russia's, quote, false flag in Ukraine be part of Putin's plan?
Yeah.
And in this article, which is, again, part of this idea of Putin five-dimensional chess, but I got to say, the Russian government is actually very strategic and smart about these things. And I think that, I'm not sure if this is true, but I think that there's a possibility it could potentially be true. And anyway, the argument in the article, it cites anonymous U.S. intelligence officials, and they say that maybe that Russia was intentionally sloppy and allowed some of their intelligence to be accidentally taken by U.S. spies that showed plans for an invasion of Ukraine because they actually wanted the U.S. intelligence agencies to think Russia was invading, which is why U.S. intelligence agencies have all of these specific plans for specific days, and that this is actually a plot by Russia to accidentally, in scare quotes, leak this information to make the U.S. think that it's going to invade, which then the U.S. looks like an idiot on the international stage because they keep saying Russia's going to invade and they don't do it.
How can anyone
it could
follow
be
that?
true, actually.
Well, you'll be able to.
Yeah. Well, they're really going to show us, because what if all this time Russia really had plans to invade, and every time there was some mole, and they're like, damn it, they figured it out again, and they keep pushing it back and pushing it back. And while we're sitting here complaining about the Joe Biden administration, Joe Biden and Anthony Blinken are the only things that have been standing in the way of this imminent Russian invasion that keeps getting pushed back further and further down the year.
Saving democracy.
One declassified I don't know, you guys, my brain just blanked out.
Well, you know what? I'd like to go out here. I'd like to go out here with just one more clip of these crisis actors.
Chuck Norris.
It's just amazing. I mean, they even got a Chuck Norris lookalike who's involved in this false flag.
Or they actually got Chuck Norris. They really went all out.
He's out
there. I don't think that guy's cheap.
It was good to talk to you, Ben. And let's put up the name of your outlet. And
Clarissa.com. You've been producing fantastic work. Your production, the amount you put out is amazing. Very prolific.
Thank you.
So encourage everybody to go check out.
Thank you. What's been great to see is I've gotten a lot of people actually starting to contribute. Yesterday, I published 2 contributions. So anyone listening or watching, if you want to contribute anything, I'd love to publish it. Unfortunately, I have no money. I have no budget even for myself, yet alone for contributors. But I'm always happy to publish what people want to write and promote it. And yesterday, I published a really good piece of analysis about Ukraine and about how this conflict in Ukraine, manufactured by the U.S., plays into its new Cold War on Ukraine, on Russia and China. And I published another piece about Nicaragua. So a lot of stuff related to these issues.
Well done. We've all been following. We really appreciate all the work you're doing. Go ahead, Kevin, before I blank out again with my COVID.
Yeah. I was just going to mention Propaganda Today again, the show that you host. And then finally, as we wrap for everyone who has watched the show this week, this is the plug for where you can support us, Unauthorized Disclosure, over at patreon.com. And then we also got a rockfin.com/unauthorized dis page. We're over on Rockfin with all the fabulous anti-vaxxers hanging out over there, who are, I'm sure, going to be aggressively downvoting our video for the first half of the show.
Likely.
And they probably didn't make it past that first half to watch the last part of this episode.
Sorry. I forgot to mute that.
All right.
Well, it's always a real pleasure. I love you guys. Love your show. Long time contributor, or long time patron. So
yeah, we appreciate that, Ben.
You're actually the first podcast that I ever subscribed to. I think I only subscribed before.
God. That's so cool. Thank you, Ben. That actually means a lot hearing that.
Yeah, I've been following you guys for a long time, so it's always fun to be on.
We've been on for a long time.
This is our 9th
You all had a podcast before it was popular,
Yeah, it was Kevin's idea.
Yeah, where's our Spotify deal?
Yeah, seriously, I've been waiting. Like, give me the $200 million, man.
It was like all the punk bands that were punk before like the golden age of punk and like hardcore in the 80s and 90s, and like they were just like too early. They're like proto punk, and no one knows them. That's like you all.
Yeah, we were before our time, Kevin.
All right. Well, as we say every week, we'll be back next week with another episode.